Rootworm History 101. I'm going to give you a seminar, a year's worth of rootworm history in 20 minutes, or 20-something minutes, Dr. Prosco. Today we're going to talk about the rootworms that matter in peanuts. And the first one we're going to talk about is the southern corn rootworm. All right? You're in class today, Rootworm History 101. Here's your quiz. Who knows who that person is? Somebody say it out loud. Who's that person? No one knows. That's the 39th President of the United States, Mr. Jimmy Carter. What does Jimmy Carter have to do with rootworm management? Jimmy Carter was born and raised in Plains, Georgia. Plains, Georgia is the epicenter of where rootworm, southern corn rootworm, is a major problem in the state of Georgia. When President Carter was born in 1924, if he had gone out in a peanut field in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, any time in his lifetime, if he had gone in a peanut field around Plains, Georgia, Sumter County, Terrell County, Randolph County, I can just about promise you he would have seen one of these beetles in the peanut field. Okay? Well, does that mean that southern corn rootworm is public enemy number one? If you're a history buff or a crime buff, you may know J. Edgar Hoover. He coined this phrase back when they were after John Dillinger in the 30s, I guess. Public enemy number one. No, I don't think it was. Let's talk about the rootworm and its biology. Here's some facts about this particular pest. It's native. It's always been here. For as long as we've grown peanuts and before, the southern corn rootworm's been here. It's a generalist insect. What does that mean? It means it eats a lot of things. It's not called the southern peanut rootworm for a reason. Okay, it's called southern corn rootworm, but it eats lots of stuff, right? Not just corn and peanuts. Subterranean, the immature stage, that larva right there, it spends its whole life from the time the egg hatches until it becomes an adult. It's below ground. That's tough for you if you're trying to manage it. It's hard to find it. All right? It's hard to get chemistry down to the ground to kill it. It's restricted. Mark, what do you mean it's restricted? This is the good news. It has to have moist soil in order to survive. And when you see that insect in that picture, you see how red that soil is. That soil came from plains. That's the kind of place where we see southern corn rootworm. Right? It's restricted. We didn't see it everywhere. So where was it a problem for peanut? Well, it was a problem in field with heavy textured soils, red clay soils. And guess what? It wasn't a problem every year. Back in the 1920s and 30s, it wasn't a problem every year. In dry years, southern corn rootworms weren't bad. Right? It was bad in years when it got wet. We had adequate or surplus rainfall. Things change. That's going to be a theme. We're going to talk about this over and over again. Things change. What happened? Center pivot irrigation. The first center pivot irrigation system was erected in Georgia in 1967. How many got? 30,000 or so now. Eric, didn't you say the other day there's 27,000 center pivot? 26,000 center pivots in the state of Georgia now. As the use of center pivot irrigation went up around Plains and Terrell and Randolph counties, right? Suddenly we can keep soil conditions favorable for peanut growth all season long. Guess what else we did? We made soil conditions favorable for this insect all season long, and now rootworm is a constant pest every year. We have to deal with rootworms every year. All right? Let's back up a second. Oh, Mark, that's great. That's wonderful. What does it do? Why do I care? All right, peanut farm, why do I care about rootworms? We have known that rootworms were an agricultural pest for a long time. There are papers published from the 1800s in scientific journals that talk about rootworms as a pest of agriculture. In the 1940s, the 1950s, there's papers published specifically about southern corn rootworm and peanuts. How do we manage it in peanuts? All right, what does it do? The immature stage, that larva that I showed you on the previous slide, it feeds on roots and pegs, see that? And it feeds on developing pods right there. And what does it do? The most important thing it does is reduce yield. But it also can delay maturity. As that plant tries to compensate for lost pods, the maturity is delayed. We can have reduced grade, one, because it delayed maturity, but two, we can have reduced grade because we have damage in the harvested product. That's not as common, but it can happen. So that's what it does. That's why we care. We're talking about history, right? How did they manage? Anybody remember the 1920s? What insecticides were available to farmers, Gerald Harrison, in the 1920s? The good old days. Arsenic. That's what they had. Arsenic, Mr. Gerald, the good old days. I remember back in the good old days when we put arsenic out on our peanuts, right? And then things moved into the better old days in a way. In the 1930s, 40s, 50s, we had a list of products. Look at this. Names like DDT, diphenate, chlordane. These things have at least two things in common. One, they were dang good soil insecticides, and two, we can't use them in peanuts anymore. All right? Can't use those anymore. But in the 1980s, a new product got registered in peanut. It'd been around since the 60s, but it got registered in peanut. It's called chlorpyrifos. A lot of y'all know it as Lorsban. It goes by other names. There's generics. The 1980s, chlorpyrifos came out, and it became used. It was used probably on most, if not all, the peanut acres in Georgia back in the old days. Why? One, we were trying to protect against soil insects. But two, it had white mold activity, better than the white mold products that were out at the time. And so everybody used it. Right? But they didn't want to use it necessarily. But things changed, remember? Things changed. What changed? We got better fungicides. People stopped using chlorpyrifos, and what'd they find? Well, they stopped using chlorpyrifos, and they didn't get eaten up by soil insects. And they go, oh, well, wait a minute. They stopped using chlorpyrifos, and they weren't flaring secondary pests like mites and caterpillars. Ooh, well, and the use shrank. We didn't use chlorpyrifos as much. We understood the risk of soil insects. Everywhere you go in Georgia, soil insects weren't a huge problem. So use declined. It declined to the point in 2013 when I moved back home to Georgia, most of the state wouldn't use chlorpyrifos at all. Where did they use it? They used it here, where southern corn rootworm was a problem. It continued to be a problem. Those growers knew it was a problem, and they used it every year. Okay? Things change. 2000s come along. Chlorpyrifos is under increased scrutiny. The EPA, environmental groups, they're looking at that product and they're saying, we don't like that stuff. We think it causes problems with people and their health. All right? In 2015, the EPA says we're going to ban chlorpyrifos. We're going to do that in 2016. Well, in 2017, things changed. We had a new president. And under Donald Trump, the EPA said, nah, we're not going to ban chlorpyrifos. It's already under re-review anyway. We're just going to let the process play out. That went along. And then 2019 came along, and the court got involved. Court out in Ninth Circuit Court in California. I don't need to say anything else about that, right? They overstepped their bounds, in my opinion. So I did say something else about it, right? They told EPA, they said, EPA, you got to do one of two things. You either have to provide evidence that chlorpyrifos is safe, or you got to ban it. Those are your two choices. And the EPA said, well, providing evidence that it's safe, that would be hard. Banning it would be easy. This is a paraphrase. I don't know what the EPA actually said, but that's basically, in effect, that's what they did. So they said, we're going to cancel all food use tolerances, and that's what they did. All right? What happened after that? Well, that meant that in 2022 and 2023, peanut farmers in this state that I care about, that Seth McAllister cares about, didn't have anything in their arsenal to effectively manage rootworms in the state of Georgia. Okay? That's a problem. I found this while doing research for this talk. This is from a TV commercial, the good old days, for Lorsban 15G. Lorsban 15G, that bucket holding water. All other rootworm insecticides was a leaky bucket. You know where we are today? Right there. In 2025, the best thing we have that's legal to use for rootworm management is chlorpyrifos, and everything else is a leaky bucket at best. Okay? What else happened? Other things were happening. If that's all that happened, it wouldn't be such a big deal. I wouldn't be talking about rootworms today. We started out talking about southern corn rootworm. Now we're going to talk about the banded cucumber beetle. The banded cucumber beetle arrived, I don't know when. It didn't show up in somebody's suitcase. Its range expanded over time. All right? It's tropical in origin. It's not supposed to survive freezing temperatures. It's supposed to be dead today in Georgia, but it ain't. All right? In other regards, it's very much like a southern corn rootworm. It's a generalist. Its larvae are subterranean. It's a cousin of the southern corn rootworm. But it's adapted now. It survives Georgia winters. Not only has it adapted, it's thrived here. There's a lot of them. There's a bunch of them. Where's it a problem for peanuts? Well, you can go to the same places in Georgia that was on that circle on the map that had southern corn rootworm problems, and they have lots of banded cucumber beetles. And if that was all there was, I might not stand here today and talk to you about rootworms, but that's not all there is. It's also a problem in a lot of other places like Tift County and Berrien County and Seminole County and Decatur County, places where I've gotten reports of rootworms damaging peanuts in recent years, and this is the insect that we find in the field, not southern corn rootworm anymore, banded cucumber beetle. What else happened between 2013 and 2025? For one thing, I moved back home to Georgia and got a job as a peanut entomologist at the University of Georgia. Proud to be here. It was very clear from the time I got here that chlorpyrifos was going to go away. Whether the Ninth Circuit Court got involved or not, chlorpyrifos was going to get banned, and we needed an alternative for the folks who lived in that high-risk area. So here we are, my technician's out, he's looking at, we're simulating chemigation here, doing anything we could think of insecticide-wise. Could we come up with a chlorpyrifos alternative? At the same time, and unbeknownst to me, Syngenta, a chemical company, was developing new AIs, and one of them I want to talk about in a second, but that's important, this new AI that they're working on. Ag chemical industry is our friend here. At the same time, the Georgia Peanut Commission, the National Peanut Board, Premium Peanut, they saw the need for rootworm research, and they were willing to invest their dollars in rootworm research, not just testing insecticides, but can we understand more about the biology of these pests? This new rootworm that we got, can we manage it in another way? Right? Can we change our production practices? Can we do something different that will reduce the risk of these pests? What did we learn? I'm going to boil down an awful lot of work and a whole bunch of data slides into a few bullet points. I hope you appreciate that. Okay? First of all, I'm going to say this. If it wasn't for peanut farmers in these counties telling us we could drive our side-by-side across their peanut fields and collect data, this would not be possible. If it was not for the county agents in those counties that made the connection between us and those farmers and found fields for us, this would not be possible. I'll say that first, okay? What did we learn? 68 commercial peanut fields over 2 years in Terrell, Sumter, and Webster County. We found out that banded cucumber beetles and southern corn rootworms have 2 generations a year in the peanut field. Why is that important? That means you got to protect your peanuts from southern corn rootworm and banded cucumber beetle for over 2 months. Because when the first generation comes out of the ground as an adult, what does he do? Turns around and lays its eggs right back in the field. So now we got to control, we got to manage that insect for a longer period of time. Found out that banded cucumber beetle, which we thought was more abundant, now we know outnumbered southern corn rootworm by a factor of 4 to 1. In some fields it was 10 to 1. But over all those fields in those years, that 4 to 1, this insect is more abundant. This is important. Banded cucumber beetle adults, and not just the adults, but also injury is more abundant in peanut fields when they are planted beside corn. Y'all hear what I'm saying? Being next to corn is a problem for rootworm. They're coming out of the corn and going into those peanut fields and they're laying their eggs. That's important. Okay? We also saw that irrigation, which is so important for southern corn rootworm, which elevated its pest status, is not as important for banded cucumber beetle. Let's think about it now. Banded cucumber beetles in places where we never saw it before. It's in lighter textured soils where we never saw it before. Why? Because it can survive in drier soil. It adds to that data that tells us that banded cucumber beetle is different than southern corn rootworm. All right, what else did we learn? I mashed the right button. Peanut will compensate, at least it'll try to compensate for rootworm damage. It'll put on more pegs and pods. If it's got long enough, it might compensate. Sometimes we see a lot of injury, and at the end of the year, we don't have a yield loss, right? But sometimes, and we have documented yield losses that exceed 1,000 pounds, and that's no joke. That happens in the real world, not just in our plots. We see maturity delayed. We see increased incidence of mold in pods that have been fed on by rootworm. What else? We also learned that all those insecticides that we tested don't work very good, okay? We can put bifenthrin through the pivot in our irrigation water. It helps some. It helps sometimes, but it doesn't help all the time. People ask me, well, can we spray the beetles? Put a foliar spray out there, kill the beetles. You can, but it won't kill enough of them. We cannot reduce pod injury by spraying the adults no matter what we spray or how often we spray. Okay? What else? I talked about that new AI, not artificial intelligence, active ingredient that Syngenta was developing, isocycloserum. I don't know if I pronounced it right. You can ask them out front when you get out here. Get you a sausage dog and ask them if Abney said isocycloserum right. They call it planazoline technology. In our test, it significantly reduces rootworm injury in irrigation water, and even more importantly, in furrow at plant. Y'all hear what I'm saying? This insect is a problem in June and July and August, but an in-furrow application at plant. That's what this is. In furrow at plant, right beside it, 2 feet away, untreated. Do I need to explain the difference in that? I don't think so, right? You don't have to be an entomologist to see which one you prefer. Very excited about that. So where are we today? This year, you're a peanut farmer and you got rootworms on your farm. Where are we at? Well, chlorpyrifos was unbanned. I don't know if that's even a word, right? It was unbanned by a different court, the 8th Circuit Court in Louisiana, and they said, you know what, EPA, y'all didn't do your job right, 9th Circuit Court, y'all can go to wherever, okay? And so we could use chlorpyrifos last year, 2024. You can use it until June the 30th of 2025, all right? That's where we are today. If you don't have that, and you got rootworms, what are your other options? You can put bifenthrin in your irrigation. And I highly recommend you do it, but I'm going to tell you right now that there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee it's going to work. We don't understand why it works well sometimes, and it's a dog sometimes. We don't know, okay? But that doesn't mean I wouldn't do it because we don't have a lot of options. If you can, think about where you're going to put your peanuts this year. When you're looking at those rotations, are you going to plant it beside corn? I'm not talking about following corn from last year. I'm talking about planting it literally beside corn. If you can avoid that, you'll reduce your risk. We're going to wait and hope. That's a sucky thing to have to stand up here and say, wait and hope, but we're going to wait and hope that EPA will get registration for plinazolin. It's going to help us. It's a good product. I hope we get it. The other thing we can do is continue to scout, be observant. We want to see if we got banded cucumber beetles in the field and you're in an area where you didn't used to see it. We need to know that, okay? Because we're going to have to, if we get this product, you're going to have to decide whether or not to use it. All right? Take home message. This is it for me. All right, rootworm, it ain't going away. In fact, it's getting worse, and at UGA, we're going to keep doing everything we can to develop management strategies that work for you. Big picture. Here's the big picture. Things change, right? We got to be ready for that. Insect biology changes. Pest biology change. We get new pests, invasive species, insecticide resistance. Somebody's got to be ready. Somebody's got to be prepared to deal with that. Our production practices changed. In 1967, there was 1 center pivot in the state of Georgia. Today, there's 26,000. Who knows what we're going to be different in 10 years and how those differences are going to affect insects. We got to be ready for it. Regulations can drop on us overnight, and a toolbox that we thought was full today can be empty tomorrow. We got to be prepared for that. Okay, let me back up one more because this is it right here, y'all. This is a very good example in my mind. Rootworm is a good example of how pest management works best when all sectors, the farmers were involved, the University of Georgia was involved, ag chemistry industry got some product for us. Right, they're working on that. The commodity commissions, all those people work together to develop a pest management program.